Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Investor Lab, the auditory epicenter for passionate people seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. And joining me on the episode today was a very special guest, Caspar Roxburgh. Now, he is verging on a polymath. He's a scientist, researcher, app developer, storyteller, podcaster, author, world music DJ, and he's also a deep, deep thinker. Now, full disclosure, Caspar is actually a former client of Dashshot. And so he shares a little bit of that story about how that experience went. But the real crux and the meat of this episode is whether it was super impactful and super valuable and actually thoroughly entertaining. We talked about stuff like navigating the millennial life crisis, building wealth ethically, how to approach long-term thinking from a millennial perspective. We spoke at length about the 3 circles of ethical impact, which is a very interesting thought paradigm for you to apply in your own life, and so much more. I personally got a lot out of this episode, and I'm really looking forward to getting Caspar back on again. I know that you're going to enjoy it too. Now, this is an interesting one because we definitely took a millennial perspective, and you'll understand why when you listen to the episode. Caspar has a unique perspective on the millennial psychology based around what he does and how he's been applying his interests over the past few years. So I know that's going to be very interesting. So to that degree, if you are a millennial, this is going to be a really great episode for you. Now, a millennial is anyone who's like 24 to 40 years old, roughly. 1980 to 2000 is you were born in those years. So it's a pretty broad bucket, but I think there's going to be some interesting nodes in there that you will really resonate with. Challenges that you've potentially faced and had to try and overcome, whether they be emotional, perceived, real, all of that kind of stuff. So super impactful. If you're not a millennial and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to tune out, I would caution you against that thinking, and I would suggest that this might be a really great opportunity to get an insight into the views and perspectives of what is becoming the most influential generation on the planet. So I'd encourage you to check it out. Now, if you like this episode, if you've liked other episodes, and if you like having the dulcet tones of myself, Gabby, and a multitude of guests in your ears, and you want to share that with other people as well, then please do, because it's really, really important for us. We've got a big mission here at the Investor Lab, and we want to connect with as many people as possible. So make sure you share this, like it, send it to a friend, somebody else that could benefit, maybe another millennial who's trying to navigate the heady world of personal wealth and all of the other kind of stuff that goes along with it too. Also, please subscribe, rate, review, do all the stuff, get involved. And of course, if you want to know more, if you want more opportunities to engage more deeply with us in a multitude of ways, just head to theinvestorlab.com.au to see all of the different ways that we can help you, support you, guide you on your personal wealth creation journey. I hope you have a great listening experience, and I will see you on the inside. Hello and welcome. Joining me on the Investor Lab today is a very special guest. He is not only a scientist, a researcher, an app developer, a storyteller, a podcaster, an author, and a world music DJ. He's also a millennial, and he has a unique perspective on some things that I want to tackle today. So including the navigating the millennial life crisis, building wealth ethically, and all of that kind of stuff. Welcome to the show, Caspar Roxburgh.
G'day, guys. Thanks for having me.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure. So I want to just tackle something very early on. Now, for those who don't know, you run a podcast called Binge Thinking, which incidentally, I was actually a guest on your podcast multiple years ago when I was in a very, very different place in my life. So it's been interesting to have this connectivity with you on two sides of what has been a very transformational journey for myself. But I really want to kind of dig in. Like, what is the Binge Thinking podcast and what's it all about? And what is the millennial life crisis?
Yeah, so, basically what happened was I was living overseas about 5 years ago in Japan, and I got really stuck into podcasts around that time, the long format, having the space to be able to have these deep conversations really worked for me. And I was looking for more, I was ravenous. I just wanted to find more content, more interesting podcasts, interesting people. And I found it really hard to identify any podcasts, well, particularly from Australia. They were all very US dominant at the time. But also, I couldn't find anything with young people. And I was really interested in hearing from people my own age about what they were doing. I wanted to hear people like me. I wanted to hear people that were thinking about the big things in their life. And so after some conversations with friends, I just thought, I'm going to start that show. I'm going to start a show that is about interesting people, but they have to be young, because I want their perspective on the issues that matter to them, where they're going to take a longer term view of what it is that they care about. They're going to look at it fundamentally in a different way than somebody who's equal, brilliant, no doubt, but 40, 50, 60 years old at the height of their career. So that's kind of the show. It's
okay. That's cool, and I totally empathize with that, because actually one of the driving forces behind us starting our podcast, this show, the Investor Lab, is because whilst there is a suite of property podcasts out there in the world, even Australian property podcasts, I tend to find that they are all quite boring, and they all just kind of tackle the same, like, oh yeah, let's talk about the markets and all of that kind of stuff. And they don't talk about the story. They don't talk about the principles and the values. And I think that's kind of why we say. So I totally resonate with you on that front. But I just want to pick something you said there. You wanted to communicate with young people because they were going to take a longer term view, that someone that is, say, 45, a boomer. Let's call it what it is. Millennials versus boomers. That's going to be the title of the podcast. No, maybe not. But what I find interesting about that comment is that it is impossible in some ways for a millennial. So let's just quickly basket millennials. Millennials are 24 to 40 years old now, right? Yeah,
it's like anyone born between 1980 and 2000 is the common definition.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm squarely in that category, and so are you, and so is heaps of us, right? And it's interesting because as not to sound morbid and morose, but as the boomers die off, millennials are the biggest generation. But that's statistical fact, and it's very interesting because what that's changing is the psychographic shifts in purchasing, and that actually has massive impacts on things like real estate. But back to my point, how can someone who is 30 years old take a long-term view if the view on life should be taken over a 90-year perspective? Let's just use that as a time continuum. And they've only experienced 30% of that. How can they possibly, because if you think, oh my God, I feel so, you hit 30 and you're like, oh my God, I'm so old, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden when you're like, just in the same way that when I hit 20, I thought I was old. Now at 30, I'm like, oh my God, I was a baby. So how can you approach that dichotomy of looking forward, but having no context of time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the first obvious point to make is if you're 30 and you're taking a 90-year lifespan, then you're 30% of the way through your life. And 30% is probably enough experience to get a handle of things. I think most people feel when they turn 30, all right, like, I've done my 20s. I've been an adult independent for maybe 10 years of my life, to more or less of a degree. It's time for me to start thinking about what am I really doing? That's an obvious thing that really comes into play. You don't know everything, but you've probably figured out enough to start making some decisions. And you've also got the experience of time to understand what time can do for you. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, but okay, and I don't want to get stuck on this point, but I am very interested in it. If we take that same time horizon and we say 30, and then we divide that into 3 parts, and then we go, okay, well, let's look at the first 30% of that, which is 0 to 10, right? Given the perspective on time, when you got to 10, you were a big boy. Yeah. You're a big boy now. Yeah. So, and I'm certain that at that point, you're having feelings of independence, and you're like, I've got this stuff nailed, right, to a degree. So there is, I guess my point is that you can only ever know what you know within the context of what you have lived. So how do you take a long-term view?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. The 10-year-old thing doesn't really work, though, because you're still developing physiologically. So I'd box that one. Like, I think the first 20 years of your life, you're actually growing into a fully formed human that can make clear decisions in the way that an adult can, right? So you've probably got the last 10 years as the real one. How do you make those decisions? Time's going to change. Everything's going to be different. But I think the wake-up call, it's more about, like, taking advantage of the opportunity rather than being fully competent and able to make the best decisions. The reality is that people understand that their life is going to last for more than 10 more years. And by the time you get to 30, you've kind of worked out a lot of your naive ideas, perhaps, about the world. And so you're in a position to start going, okay, maybe I need to question some things that I assumed about myself, about my life, about who I thought I was, and about what I thought was going to happen when I became an adult and I got all this freedom. And you've also got the opportunity to leverage the success that you've already made, because you've had about 10 years of working life as well. And it's kind of, that's part of it. Yeah.
Yes, I agree, but I also simultaneously disagree, and I'll tell you why. Because we only have the context of time over a pretty finite time span, and we can't. It's virtually impossible for us to fully grasp the depth and complexity of what lays before us. And there's a Marcus Aurelius quote, which, life is but a chasm of opportunity waiting ahead and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so you can never understand the depth and the length, breadth, and depth of the chasm that lays before you. But you can, as you said, look, I'm probably going to live for at least another 10 years. But the problem with that thinking is that it's actually it stimulates a short-term action bias. And I am guilty of this, which is why I wanted to bring this up from a millennial perspective, because in life, I am transitioning in my thinking and my beliefs and my structures and my ideas. I have had a bias to, I need it all now, right? I don't want to do something now that may yield me a result when I'm 60, because what if I don't even make it to 60? That's 30 years away. And let's just say I'm 30 years old. I'm not. I'm a bit older than 30 now. But let's just use that from a perspective. Do you not think that it kind of is almost a problem that younger people, bucketing them loosely as millennials, because they can't see far enough into the future time horizon, that stimulates thinking about getting short-term results as opposed to applying long-term consistency?
Yeah, look, there's definitely short-term thinking out there. I actually don't think that's the problem. Like, just coming back to where we started, for the audience, like, I've been interviewing people under 35 of all different careers, backgrounds, everything, people, scientists, people doing PhDs, all the way to self-taught furniture makers, and people that started their own businesses. I've been doing that for 3 years. And one of the big themes that's come out for me is it's about the narrative. It's not so much that people are unable to think long-term. I think it's that we've been fed a certain story about our lives as a generation, about the opportunities that we have. So the classic one relating to this is, you're never going to be able to buy your own home. Our housing prices are too high. You're spending all your money on avos, and the relative to salaries, houses are unaffordable. Boomers are buying them all. Negative gearing. It's not going to happen for you. So just forget about it, right? And so that leads to, I think, a fear. And the fear is around, if I look, I will be confirming that story. And then my life is never going to be what I thought it could be. I'm not going to be able to achieve those things. So there's a story, and in that story comes fear, which leads to avoidance. And like, I use the example of the house because it's a really clear, obvious one. It's one that your audience is going to be familiar with, but you can apply it to lots of different things. I'm never going to get that promotion. I'm never going to get tenure. I'm never going to be able to move up. I'm going to be stuck in a low wage job for the rest of my life, because the boomers are going to stay in work and just keep those high end positions up until they're 90 plus. And the whole system is just geared against me, and with that comes a kind of continuing prolonged childhood where you don't quite feel like an adult, you're an imposter. The amount of guests that have been on my show saying that they have imposter syndrome, you hear these people, they're phenomenally successful, they're brilliant, and they go, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and like, I just can't believe that I'm even on this show, it's that sort of thing. So yeah. I think it's about fear, it's about avoidance, and it's about the kind of story that we've been told about our lives and what we can achieve as a generation.
Yeah, that's great. That is great. And I do 100% agree with you, because that ties in actually with what we were saying about timeline, story, and all of this kind of stuff, because there is a conceptualization about the identity of who they are and all of that kind of stuff. And you touched on a really, really great point there. And this is something that has plagued me. So as a millennial, as someone who for for over 15 years, built a career and a lifestyle in what is ostensibly a very left of center world, being festivals and events and all of that kind of stuff. When I made a personal development transition into having an interest in real estate, it was like I was doing something wrong.
Yeah.
It was like I was doing something wrong, and I was like trying to talk to people about it. I was like, no. I think this is actually a really good thing to do, guys. Yeah. And to this day, people view what I'm doing as unethical, immoral, all of that kind of stuff. So how do you, from your experience with looking at the millennial perspective and your particular perspective, how have you overcome that story that we tell ourselves and that we've been told that we'll never be able to buy our own home, and building a property portfolio is for rich boomers anyway, so it's a negative thing. And if you start to approach that personal wealth building journey using real estate, you're a bad person. How do you overcome that?
Well, I think, just to give a touch more context. So I think that story that I was outlining and you just explained, it spilled over to something bigger, which is making money and being successful is wrong. That there's something ethically wrong, there's something unethical about being successful financially. And that's connected as well to things like climate change, that all the money in the world has been made off the back of, environmental pollution, taking advantage of poor people, that sort of thing. So it's broader than just real estate in Australia, right?
Oh, yeah.
It really is. And that's where the issue really creeps in, because it's, on the one hand, you tell your friends, I'm looking at buying a property or something, and they're just, you're gonna be a landlord, and you're getting on top. You're getting on top of the system. So you cop it. You do. I mean, I'm exactly the same, and to this day, it's the same situation. But you find, how did I make the transition? I guess, to come to your question, I think a couple of things. So firstly, you've got to be willing to be real with yourself, right? You've got to be willing to look at, there's a great quote from, I think it's Jim Collins, the guy that wrote Good to Great, really interesting, business scholar. He said the successful businesses, they're willing to confront the brutal fact, right? So step one, get real, right? You and I, we live in Australia. We live in a modern, liberal, democratic, capitalist society. Now, this is kind of a, don't hate the player, hate the game situation. But you've got to recognize that this is a system that's been largely successful in giving people prosperity and wealth. Okay, we can have a whole discussion on that, but I'm not going to go there, right? For myself, it's about recognizing... Can of worms.
Can of
worms, I'm closing it, right? But for myself, I think I realized, look, this is the system. It's not necessarily fair in every way. There are ways that some people make money working really hard, they don't make much money, and some people are working hard but in different ways and maybe make more money. Look, that's the context. I don't control that, but I can work within that system to succeed, and then the question becomes, how do I channel that success, right? It's a separate thing, right? There's a function of success, and then there's an outcome of that success. Just because you're making money doesn't mean that there's something you've done wrong. Firstly, you can make money in ways that are ethical. You can deliberately avoid those unethical ways of making money. You can, stop me if I'm going too far here, Goose, but got the way I look at it, you start with your job, right? You got your job, okay? You can make a decision about your job. If you're working for British American Tobacco, you can probably ask yourself in the morning, what exactly does my work that I dedicate my 8 hours a day do? What am I pushing forward into the world? What outcomes are coming out of this? We know poor health outcomes for people, right? Addiction, problems, real genuine life suffering, right? Now, without going into a consequentialist, everything causes some sort of suffering butterfly effect situation. You draw that contrast with, say, someone who decides that they want to work in healthcare, right? A bit more, clear cut morally. Like, there are decisions that you can make about what you do for your work that makes you a salary, that leads you to maybe say, okay, I feel like I'm making money, but I'm doing it in a way that's ethical. Yes, I'm getting paid. Yes, it's not perfect, but I've made a conscious decision that the things I'm going to dedicate my life to, I would like them to have a clear, positive outcome for the world. That's the first part of making money, your salary, right? You start making a bit of money, saving a bit of money, then the question becomes, okay, I've got a bit of a bank here. What am I going to do with that? That's where the investment story comes in. And this is where there's the whole, any way of making money outside of a salary is evil. Well, it's not. There are ethically managed funds out there, for example, where they deliberately look for companies that are pushing green technology, that they treat their workers well, that they don't make money off firearms, they don't make money off tobacco. And you can invest in those with $100. This is the thing. Everyone's afraid to look at the information out there because they're afraid of what they'll find. They're afraid of confirming the narrative. The reality is that there are opportunities. You don't even need to be rich. I'm not talking about somebody with $30,000 in their bank account being able to invest it. I'm talking $100. It's a difference between putting your money in a savings account or putting it into something that's actually going to work for you, but do so with a deliberate ethical responsibility in mind. And they make money. They make money. And then you can look at other kinds of investments as well, like getting to a stage where you can buy property. And this is where I love what you guys do. I love, the message that you give, especially in this show, in the Investor Lab, about service, right? Owning a property, firstly, the term landlord, I think is, it's a bit mixed. I mean, this idea of a lord over someone, I don't particularly like it. I prefer property owner. But as a property owner, you're serving people. You're providing someone with shelter. And they're paying you for it, but you're also paying for the ability to give it to them. It's an exchange of goods, and you can take that responsibility seriously. You don't have to be a landlord that jacks up the rent every single opportunity that you get. You don't have to be a landlord that refuses to spend any money on making the house more livable, right? And everyone, no matter what their budget, deserves the dignity of decent housing. This idea that you can't afford to live in a decent home because you don't have the money, that's rubbish, and you can be a landlord, not a landlord, a property owner. And
you can also be a landlord too, because I would just say that your reaction to that word is, I guess, a really great representation of some of the negative connotations that get associated with language patterns that actually, we don't live in feudal England. I'm not a lord, right? But we can use that terminology, and we should be able to detach the negative bias. I agree with you. It does have a negative bias, but it's also just a vernacular terminology. So
it is, yeah. I mean, you could go either way. I'm not going to tell. I'm not policing language.
It's not syntax class, but
I think it's about the intent, right? I'm just making a point here about intent. So just bringing it all back to your question. How did I make the transition? This is what I do. How do I make the transition? I guess the key thing is that, one, you got to recognize the game you're living in. And you've got to be real with yourself that you're not going to change that, but that you can make it work for the greater good. So there's the money making, how you make money, is it ethically made, right? And then the last part is, what do you do with that money? What do you do with that, right? And that's the key question.
That is the key question. And I think that is a question that a lot of people don't take the time to ask themselves. And because also a lot of people think that ethical, like building ethical wealth, means you have to give it all away. Like there's this kind of, people don't understand, I think, how to apply ethics, morality, vision, principled thinking, all that kind of stuff to their own journey in a meaningful way. So when I think about ethics, there's circles, that radiate out from the center. Now, in the center is your personal situation. Okay. There is affluence, opulence, all these kind of different things. You got to find out where your sweet spot is, like what you're aiming for and what's going to be good for you and why, and analyze the ethics around that scenario. Then you've got family and friends, and you've got that kind of circle there. Then you've got community, and then you've got philanthropy, and you've got these kind of circles of which you can go out, and you can try and tackle all the circles on a small budget. So you could be like, okay, cool. And it was totally fine, right? Listen, I've got $100. So I'm going to spend $20 on myself, $20 on something for my family, $20 on, something in the community. And I'm going to donate $20. Well, I haven't even done the maths on that, but you get the point, to a global charity or something.
Yeah.
there's different ways of looking at it, because I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, oh, well, if I want to be ethical, that means that I must basically live like Mother Teresa and give away all of my money all of the time. Otherwise, it's unethical. And I think that is incorrect thinking. But I think a lot of people don't think about it in that kind of cycle. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, though, you kind of touched on it. So full disclosure for the listeners. Now, Caspar came to work with us at Dashdot in our buyer's agency service. We had known each other previously because a couple of years ago I was on the Binge Thinking Podcast myself. But I'm interested to know, like, what the transition point was for you. So where had you gotten to on your journey in life that made you think, okay, now is the time to invest? But then also, what actually made you want to like work with us or anyone? Like, what made you want to like transition to like, okay, I'm going to go use a buyer's agent?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So yeah, basically just relating it back to my last point. So I'd been saving my money. I'd been investing in basically managed funds, which were ethical investments, and everything was going fine. But obviously, one of the basics of investment is that you should have a diverse investment portfolio, manage risk, that sort of thing. And that I wanted, it was kind of one of my goals. I was like, I need to diversify. I don't want all my money in one place effectively. And I'd always known about property. My parents had made good money buying houses, fixing them up as we'd been growing up. So that had been part of my life. So I was aware of that. And obviously you can't be Australian and not be aware that, property prices go up and there's money to be made in that. And I've been thinking about it for a long time, right? So I got to the point where I was like, okay, I think I've got enough money to get into this game, but I want to do it smart, right? I'm a scientist. I wanted to be data-driven, evidence-based. I was not looking to buy a house that I wanted to live in one day. And pretty much everyone I knew, everyone I spoke to, they're like, oh, well, you got to buy in this place because that's where you grew up, or why you wouldn't want to live in that house, or don't buy that, or whatever. And I was just thinking that's the wrong way to make this decision, right? You got to understand your goals. So I decided, and I was working with my mum on this one. We were going to work on, we were going to invest together, right? Just, so I wasn't buying it by myself. And so we decided, okay, we're going to do this data-driven. We're going to pull the data from ABS. We're going to look at incomes, all this sort of stuff. So we started working on it, and I'm a busy person. I work full-time. I've got my podcast. I've got my DJing. I've got my creative projects. I'm social. She's busy. She's running, fixing up houses, doing stuff like that. So it's 6 months, 8 months, and there's basically no progress. There's no progress. And in the meantime, I'm seeing all the, stuff about Dashdot online. And what I noticed was that there was a genuine alignment in the approach or the methods. So there was a question around what's the philosophy, but then also there was the methods. It was data-driven. It was based in looking at the stats, looking at where's the best place for you based on your budget and where can you put your money to a property that's going to be cash flow positive, it's the big one you guys always talk about. And I saw that and I connected with it, and I thought, you know what? I think these guys are basically doing what we're doing, but they're doing it really well and we're doing it really badly. And to take a step back from that, like, what's the logic here? So in life, you put your faith in professionals every day. We all do this, right? You get onto a plane, you're putting your life in the hands of the pilot. There's nothing more valuable, more important, more precious than your life, right? And we put our lives in the hands of others all the time, doctors, pilots, even Uber drivers, right? Okay, all the time. When it comes to money, there's this idea out there that everyone's going to scam you, right? And there are people that you've got to be cautious around, but professionals that work transparently are generally trying to do the right thing. And so my philosophy on this was like, time is money. I don't have the time to do this. I've had a crack myself. I haven't made any progress. Here's a group of people that are doing this. They're doing it professionally. They're doing it well, probably better than I could ever hope to do it. And then it becomes a return on investment question. What am I losing by waiting another year to find a property in terms of potential growth? And what would I be willing to pay to capture that? and to not have to deal with an enormous amount of the admin and the hassle and everything like that and be distracted from my work, which I'm good at. I don't need to become a property expert, to be able to do this. So that was kind of the logic. That's how I came to you guys, to Dashdot, and what the idea was behind that.
That's fascinating insight. I really appreciate it. One of the things I'm really enjoying about this conversation is the depth and articulation of your thoughts. I really, really appreciate it. That's good. Okay, so well, that's good. Appreciate that. That's wonderful. My next question is, how do you? Now we've done this journey, right? We bought the house. It's all good.
Yeah.
And understanding the pathway that you took to get there, how do you measure? Firstly, what was your metric of success? How do you? How does your experience weigh up against that? And how does this play into your long-term thinking?
Yeah, so I guess the metric of success was, one, get in the game, right? There's a big 0 to 1, barrier here. People we had someone on my podcast a while ago say, ideas are free, it's all in the execution. And it is, right? And that's often where people fall down. So just the execution itself, for me, was probably the number one thing. I've got a reasonable appetite for risk, but the house was exactly the kind of investment in terms of the price range. The experience was positive. I got, everything got lined up. The property is cash flow positive. I'm seeing that now. So, I mean, it's early. I settled on this property in February this year. So, it's a very early stage to be able to assess how it's performing, but it's successful. And I guess one of the big things was that we had tenants in from day one, and they're happy and we're happy, and it all seems to be working out. There's no one's losing in this situation. So yeah, that's probably a bit about the success. And for me, it's often my mentality is very much set and forget. I do take a long-term view, with market fluctuations like they are at the moment. I'm I don't really care, I'm 31 years old. I've got a job. I've got a salary. I don't have debt obligations that are going to wreck me. I don't really need to think about this, and it's better that I don't. So that's kind of just my own personal approach to investing that makes, just to explain why I'm like, yeah, look, we'll see. But it's fine. It's working well. Where am I going? I mean, the obvious place is further along the journey. I mean, this is step one. I bought an affordable house. It was only a couple of $100,000. We're not talking about a $500,000 property even, and it's certainly not in a massive major capital city or anything like that. I wanted to start small, get a taste of things, learn the lay of the land. And can I also point out that one of your key characteristics was actually with an environmental lens over it. One of the characteristics around how you were going to define if this was in the right place, aside from all the barrier metrics about demography, psychography, and all of that other kind of stuff, was climate change. Yeah. Well, this one really came from my mum, but basically it was around the summer of the bushfires, Black Summer. So it was at the front of our minds. And, she said, look, I don't believe in housing that doesn't have long-term sustainability around climate change. The climate is changing. We just read a report saying, Brisbane is going to be so hot in summer in 20 years' time, it's going to be uninhabitable. That came out of the University of Queensland. People, I'm not giving any specific advice here to people who are listening. It's just that was the concept. It's is there bushfire risk? Is there flood risk? Those sorts of things, right? But taking that quite seriously. And we gave that to you guys, and you guys, I think, loved the brief, to be honest. You seem to be really into it, which is great. And that was part of what was factored in the search. So, yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I would just point out that the thing that excites me and interests me the most, the absolute precipice of what gets me excited, is when there is a unique proposition. When, when it's either it's okay, I've got something a little left of center. How do we approach that? Because that appeals to my problem solving, creative thinking. And I'm like, oh, okay, how do we apply data to some completely new associated outcomes, desires, and all of that kind of stuff? So personally, I thought it was really interesting. I want to just kind of take this on a slightly tangential perspective, because there's a few things that you've mentioned in the course of this conversation that I would be remiss if I didn't at least approach it. A quote from Jim Collins, really appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
You've obviously done a lot of work on your mindset. There's a lot going on in there, and you seem robust in your thinking. So I've got a few questions that I've jotted down through the course of this conversation that I want to ask and I want to get your perspective on.
Mm-hmm.
I am mindful of time, so let's try and let's try and keep it tight. But I mean, tell me a little bit about how you, on your personal journey, have gone about developing, your mindset, your goal setting, consistency. How have you approached that kind of personal growth journey?
Yeah, another great question, could go on for hours. Keeping it brief, I guess I'm a big reader. I really believe in reading as a way of learning and thinking. So I've got 4 or 5 books beside my bed at any given time. As I mentioned before, podcasts, mad for podcasts, but I like information. I don't read fiction. I read nonfiction only. I listen to podcasts that are informational. I don't listen to story podcasts or true crime or whatever. I just soak up information. I love learning about things. I love discussing them with people. And that's just been a theme all my life. And those are the mediums that I'm probably using the most at the moment. Outside of that, mindset-wise, I'm a meditator. I'm not a great meditator by any stretch, but I meditate. I
suck at meditating.
The thing is, it doesn't matter if you suck. You still get the benefit. And I've seen how it helps me in my work. It helps me in my personal life. So I do it. I just do it all the time. And that leads to a lot of reflection, a lot of questioning. Then the other thing I'm trying to do more of at the moment is consciously asking myself, what's my vision in my life across multiple facets of my life? And then if that's my vision, what does it take to get there? What are the actions that I need to take to get to that place? And then sitting down and going, okay, so when am I going to do those things? And this comes back to that theme around be real with yourself, and I've been doing this not just myself, but actually with friends and, family members, people with businesses that want to work on a particular idea, sitting down with them and just saying, okay, one of the problems I think we have is that we tend to labor under the impression that we should be achieving a lot more than we are. But it really helps to sit down and go, okay, well, if these are the things you think you should be achieving, you're smart, you know what it takes. What is it? You define for yourself, what is it going to take? And then sit down and start allocating time. And all of a sudden you realize, I'm actually trying to achieve a lot more than I've got time for, and I have to start prioritizing. And that, it's just being fair to yourself. And so I'm starting to do a lot more of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, being fair to yourself is a really big thing, because I am horrible for it. Like, I'll be like, I'm going to do 10 billion different things, and then when I don't achieve them, I'm a failure. And that, so then it's really become about going, okay, well, how do I prioritize? Like, what is, and then how does this actually fit in with a long-term plan? And the natural extension of trying to basically avoid failure, avoiding that feeling of failure, which is really important, I think. The process of trying to avoid that feeling of failure dictates that you must set clear, definitive outcomes that you're aiming for. And they must have a reason. Like, they must have a validation, because otherwise you're going to feel like a failure. Yeah. And so if you don't want to feel like a failure, you've got to get real about this,
Yeah, and you've got to connect it to your values. And it comes back again to this point you made before about short-term thinking, right? Everyone wants it to happen. Yeah, but I want it to happen now. Sit down and actually talk about what it would take to get something done. You'll realize there's a reason why it's not going to happen right now. And that's, it's just conscious. I think self-examined life, a conscious, aware, self-examined life is what I'm really trying to get toward across the board.
Absolutely. That's a quote by Socrates. A life unexamined is a life not worth living. And I couldn't agree more with that, with that sentiment, and that's, I guess, the scientific mode with which not only I've approached my life, like I see, I don't mean this is not hyperbole. I genuinely view my existence as a science experiment that I have the opportunity to conduct on myself. And that is literally how I've approached probably the last 20 or so years of my 30 or so years of existence. That has been a really deep, it's like, okay, what happens if I do this? And how do I find the outside of that? Which is also what's led my passion for data and tracking and everything like that. Because I'm like, well, you know, if you're going to do a science experiment, you're at least going to work it out, right?
Yeah, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? You know,
exactly.
And tapping into the scientist in me. I mean, the other thing about that, Goose, that's important is, okay, if your life's an experiment, but also it's an expression. It's an expression of your vision of humanity. You are a human being. You represent human beings, and your choices represent your vision of what humanity can be. So this is a Sartre quote, and it's a good one. It's one I love. When you choose for yourself, you choose for all mankind, right? You can't escape that responsibility. You cannot escape.
Can you say that quote again? Can you just say that quote again?
When you choose for yourself, you choose for all mankind.
Boom. That's a ton of bricks.
Yeah. And that's the moral responsibility, the moral dimension to our individual choices. That's what it's all about.
Who do you like, where do you look for inspiration, leadership? Like, where do you, because you can't, like, everyone has figures that they look towards. Who are yours?
Yeah. I mean, my parents are definitely right up the top.
That's good.
You know, it's a lot of people, it's their parents. It's definitely the parents for me. They gave me everything I have, taught me everything, and especially morally, you know, they're very moral people. They're deep thinkers. Aside from them, actually my current boss at my work, Stuart Higgins, is just an inspiration. He's probably the most emotionally intelligent person I've ever worked for in my life. And he thinks very deeply about ideas. He's very consultative. I like that a lot. But then I'm not a big reader of philosophy anymore. I did study it when I was younger. I mentioned Sartre before. It's probably had a bit of influence on my moral thinking. And I'm actually a really, really, really big fan of Sam Harris, who's kind of a philosopher, neuroscientist, thinker, podcaster, author, and so I read a lot of his stuff and listen to a lot of what he has to say as well. They're probably some rapid fires.
I'm not familiar with Sam Harris, so I'll look up Sam Harris.
Get into it.
Okay, before we wrap up though, so you bought one property now.
Yeah.
Where, like, you want to keep building a portfolio? Is it like one and done? What you've obviously done a lot of visioning about how you want your life. Like, where do you want to go on your property journey? Property
specifically, well, as I mentioned, it was a pretty low price property that I bought. I co-invested with my mother. So I'd like to buy one on my own, maybe at a higher price point as well. I see property, it's like an engine for wealth creation, right? There's a service element there, but it's not, for me, it's not about like, I want to replace my income and retire early. Like, that's not my vision. I love working, you know, and I wouldn't stop. I don't want to stop. For me, it's about that capacity. What does that enable you to do? So I want to build my property portfolio over the course of my lifetime. And the kind of endpoint has got nothing to do with how many properties. It's got nothing to do with a number in my bank account, and everything to do with what I can do with that wealth for my community. So it starts with looking after myself, which I'm thankful I can already do, then family, and friends, like you said, those circles, but then community. And I guess my long-term goal in this journey is to be able to fund the arts, sciences, and conservation of the environment through the wealth and, you know, prosperity that I'm lucky enough to experience in my life. And not just with me, but also as with my family. So working on that together, that's actually a collective goal that we have, is to start a foundation that gives grants to arts, sciences, and conservation.
That's awesome. That is so good. I'm so aligned with that. Awesome, man. I have, this has definitely been a very insightful and impactful episode. I think there's a lot of gold nuggets, a lot of takeaways out of this one. So what, if people want to like listen to your podcast or anything like that, what's the best way that they can reach out to you there, or how can they get in touch with that? Because there's obviously a lot going on in that engine room between your ears. And I think people will get a lot out of joining that conversation too.
Yeah. So if people are interested, the podcast, as Goose said, is called Binge Thinking or Binge Thinking Podcast. You just Google Binge Thinking Podcast, you'll find us. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Not hard to find on any of those platforms. You can just listen off our website. Everything's downloadable. But obviously, if you've got a podcast app of any kind at all, or you have Spotify, just look for Binge Thinking Podcast. You'll find it. So that's the easiest way. And if you like it, you can always contact us and suggest a topic or a guest or whatever. So it's all there in the internet. It's fairly easy to find.
And also, if you're fascinated about hearing previous Goose, back when I had a big beard, weighed about 30 kilos heavier and was producing a music festival, dig back into the earlier episodes and let me know what you think.
Yeah, I think you were in the first 10 or 15 episodes, so it's really toward the start. But it was a great episode actually, and I think there's a photo of me cooking you a roast pork dinner when we were doing that recording. So that's pretty nifty. And I'll just give a little shout out because we've actually got Gabby, your partner, and the other half of the top tier of Dashdot, coming on the show in probably, it might already be out by the time you release this episode of the Investor Lab. So you can also hear Gabby's story, which I'm really excited about putting out.
I am actually really, really excited to hear that episode because I usually spend so much time talking and Gabby doesn't usually do much of the talking. She's a bit more introverted than I am. When I was busy working away, when she came out of that recording with you, she was, beside herself with both joy, elation, overwhelm, all kinds of stuff, and it was long. It was long too. I am really looking forward to that episode coming out, and I'm definitely going to be tuning into that one. So.
Yeah. I walked away from that recording feeling pretty elated myself. It was
awesome.
It was beautiful. Yeah,
awesome.
Which is what we like to do at Binge Thinking.
Yeah,
we get deep.
That's the look. A good podcast is one that makes you feel. So look, man. Thanks for your time today. Thanks for your insights. I'd be very interested to have you on again, maybe in a year's time or something like that, where we can check in on your personal wealth journey and how you're navigating the the ever-churning river of millennial life, ethical opportunism, personal wealth development, and all of that kind of stuff. But I've thoroughly enjoyed our time today, so thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, Goose. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure.
Definitely do it again.
Cool, man. Sweet. Thanks for your time.